like a diamond. Shine
Hey
bright
guys.
like a diamond.
Hey guys, welcome back to Queer Stream Matters. It's Chicken River.
Oh no!
Have a kiss bed there.
My poor boy.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Trans Lesson Plan podcast season 2. And River's going to go heat us up some food. We got chili from Pompeii Pizza. I had some for lunch. We have some left over, so we're going to split it. And we got rolls from Cherry Market. And those are both in Bayonne, New Jersey, which is where Queer History Matters is based out of. And we always like to shout out our favorite local restaurants and anything else that brings us joy and anyone else who's an important part of our community. So definitely check those out if you're in the area. Cherry Market has a lot of really good prices on fruits and vegetables, and Pompeii has really good slices. They got good chili. They got, what else do I like their wraps. I'm not a huge fan of the Caesar salad, but I do like the buffalo chicken wrap. And yeah. So we're gonna go heat up leftovers.
I've only had their chili and their pizza, and they're both pretty good.
Can I have a kiss?
Of course, AP. Okay.
Alright.
I'll be back.
Also, shout out to River's parents for the nice new ring light. Hopefully this is a little bit better. Alright. I'll see you soon, honey. Alright, so where do we leave off? The Trans Lesson Plan season 1. I did a little summary of what I learned and what I found interesting, what I wanted to do my research on, and now I'm listening to season 2. Excuse me, sorry. So trying to think of how to phrase this. The Trans Lesson Plan season 2 starts with like an intro episode, and the intro episode is kind of like explaining the hiatus and is like a reintroduction to the narrator and the podcast as a whole. It's a podcast made for both trans people who want to learn more about their history, as well as for allies who like to learn more about trans history, how to better support those in the transgender community. It's a really cool podcast. It's on Spotify. Well, that's where I listen to it. But it's on a couple other podcast platforms, and they're pretty good. I've learned a lot, and I was actually in the top 8% of listeners according to my Wrapped last year, so that was pretty cool. Right now I'm still listening to season 3. It's a little bit of a shorter season, but I'm still working on it, and I wanted to give you guys an update and some cool trans history to start off for 2026. So I hope you guys enjoy my little summary and what I've learned. Hearing Mari explain who the Trans Lesson Plan is for, for both trans people who want to learn more about the history and allies who like to learn more about trans history, as well as to better support those in the transgender community, those 3 points that he made, it made me start questioning what Queer History Matters is for, like who is my audience, who is Queer History Matters for. According to my analytics, most of my viewers are middle-aged, and a lot of people tend to enjoy my kink content. That's some of my more popular work. But I feel like this channel is mostly a place where like I would want to grow up, a place that I needed 10 years ago, a channel I wish I could have watched growing up. And if you vibe with any of the topics I talk about here, I'd love to do some more interviews. Please comment down below. And I also try to check my email as often as possible. It's at queerhistorymatters420@gmail.com. Or it's just queerhistorymatters420@gmail. My old YouTube @ used to be at queerhistorymatters420. But I think right now it's at Queer History Matters. I might change it to just Queer History Matters, all one word, if I'm able to get that from YouTube. Because I know I wasn't able to before, but I also wasn't able to do just at Queer History Matters before. So maybe as like my posts get more traction, YouTube kind of recognizes me as like a more legitimate channel, if that makes sense. So let me know what you guys think I should do about the app. But if you'd like to partake in an interview, it's just queerhistorymatters@gmail.com. The podcast Trans Lesson Plan is hosted by Mari McGee, aka Mari, who is a Pro Award-winning LGBTQ plus speaker and an activist from Cleveland. He was raised in Chicago and then moved back to Cleveland, and about 7 or 8 years prior to filming, moved to Atlanta. And at the time of filming this episode, Mari was 25. He came out as lesbian in 2016 and as transgender in 2018. His family tries to be allies, and Mari felt understood as a person and loved by his family. He kind of became the teacher and the educator in the family, and they all kind of learned together. When I was younger, I went to a trans support group called PFLAG, and one of the members there had mentioned something about basically had mentioned that transitioning is a transition for everyone in your life, not just for you. And at the time I thought that was like complete bullshit, but now I kind of understand. Like, I feel like me and my family really learn together, and I do really appreciate that experience. While I wish they were a lot more accepting when I first came out, I do appreciate that they've eventually come around. And they've been a lot better parents and a lot better allies since we all started learning together, which I really, really, really appreciate. Amari learned from trans elders and gained familial support, which led to Amari being the person who he is today. He understands struggles that the transgender community face, as well as the need for positive transgender representation in mainstream media. Amari also wants to use his platform to amplify other trans voices and provide resources and support for the community, which are both things that I try to do here on Queer History Matters as well. Mari also provides historical research as well as his own personal experiences to support his work and research in the Trans Lesson Plan. The next episode focuses on Hannah Snell, who was born in 18th century England in the Warwickshire era. Hannah was born in poverty, got married young, and separated young. After her husband left, she worked odd jobs such as a coal miner by dressing as a man. She enlisted in the Royal Marines in August 1744 under the name James Gray and worked as a spy across Europe and India. Hannah/James's service ended with an honorable discharge, which ended with a shot to the groin. After this, after getting shot in the groin and leaving the military, Snell then became, entered a career in the performing arts. Mari didn't go into the specific details of what kind of performing arts that Snell went into, but I'd love to learn more about Snell's career and how she identified, and it's nice to see, like, different, not cis stories throughout history. Sorry, I need a haircut. It's bothering me. I apologize. Oh, yeah, there's some more information about it. Snell performed with King George II in his court, so that'll be interesting to research. I hope to learn more. This is interesting because I feel like this is like an OG example of women in male-dominated fields she was a trailblazer for women's rights and gender equality in the workforce. And it's interesting because like, there's just so much shit going on in England specifically having to do with the transgender community and trans military personnel today. I know in the US, things are especially hard for transgender military personnel. Like, a lot of actively out trans military personnel are no longer allowed to serve, which sucks. It's also interesting to see how, like, women who dress as men to advance their career, how they fit within the transgender narrative throughout history, and how this could have, like, impact different different women's roles at the time were very strict. And I feel like no matter if these people were dressing as men to advance their careers, or rather if they were dressing as men because they felt more like men, no matter what, they still deserve a place in history, and their stories deserve to be amplified here on Queer History Matters. Another episode focuses on the trial of M.D. Eon in the 1770s. Now, I feel like this episode I didn't quite understand a lot of what Amari was talking about, but that doesn't mean that it isn't worth talking about. But I would like to do more research on the specific case because I'm not super familiar. So M.D. Eon was he went by many names, but this is the name that Mari uses in this episode. They were tried by an all-female jury for not paying a local tradesman. This was around the start of the early feminist / women's rights / abolitionist movements, and around the start of the U.S. Industrial Revolution. 12 married women were in charge of finding if Dion was male or female. He was living as a man for years, even serving in the French military, and determined to be a woman. How did people navigate gender roles in the past? This is a theme that Mari brings up a lot in his research, and I'd like to kind of explore more within my research as well. This case explores the themes of women's rights and legal proceedings. Turns out that M.D. was AMAB and lived as a woman, but was recognized as a woman by a journey of matrons. And this is a reminder of how far women's and transgender rights have come and how far we still have left to go. Unfortunately, we will never hear their point of view of their story and the impact they made. But even with the bits and pieces that we do have, it's important to document these, and it also calls attention to the need and the importance of documenting oral history while people are still alive. I'd love to hear their point of view on what they identified with, but I can't, and it kind of calls into question how many trans stories have fallen through the cracks, whose stories get told, and how many of us have not gotten to tell our story because of shame, or stigma, or suicide, or harassment, or violence. It's just, there's a lot of themes that I've been thinking about that I see in the trans lesson plan that I think about a lot, and I try to keep in mind in doing my research, so I wanted to call attention to those as well. Another episode focuses on Mary Thrift, who was born in 17th century London. She defied gender norms by wearing men's clothing, carried a sword, and smoked a pipe in public. Which I will say, Being a female smoker and a male smoker are very different. People treat you much differently when you're a guy and you want to go smoke versus when you're a girl and you want to go smoke. I've felt that firsthand, and I mean, I only smoke marijuana. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a girl who smokes a pipe in public, like the stigma that you'd face, even in 2026. Like, that's impressive for 17th century London. Like, go girl. I'm impressed. Mary was a pickpocket / thief, and well, that's the only thing they have for occupation. I don't know, but I thought that was funny. This episode has themes of transness in London, and Omari talks about the echoes of trans stories throughout history, that trans stories are not a new concept, and he ties it into some episodes that he talked about in the first season. And he also talks about how there's no excuse to be willfully uneducated because there is so much information about trans history out there. Like, there's the Trans Lesson Plan, there's Queer History Matters, and there's a lot of other sources. I mean, there's digital archives, the Digital Transgender Archives, the NYC Trans Oral History Project, the Atlanta Trans Oral History Project. If I think of any other good resources, I'll link them in the doobly-doo. In a time when women were expected to be submissive and conformist, Mary carved her own path by refusing to bow down to societal gender expectations, not only in her personal life, but also push the boundaries of gender norms at the time by participating in political discussions and advocating for women's rights. She was critiqued for her choices, being immoral, scandalous, but she considers herself a trailblazer. Mari's episode questions what Mary's role in transgender history is, and the role of gender-diverse people before the modern idea of transgenderism that began to take form during the early Pride movement in the American 1960s. By living authentically as herself and defying gender norms, trans people have found echoes of themselves and their stories in Mary's story and activism. Mary challenged the idea of what it meant to be a woman by wearing men's dress and participating in political discussions. So, like, was she a political advocate? Was she a politician? Or was she just a pickpocket and a thief? I need to do more research on Mary. Her choices allow trans and gender diverse people to find themselves in history, provides that gender diversity is not something new, but rather something that is uniquely human and something that should be celebrated. Mari says we should all strive for self-expression and acceptance, to live your life on your own terms. Mari stresses the importance of individuality and living authentically, and that's something that I find is echoed through every single episode of the Trans Lesson Plan as well. Another episode focuses on Lillian Winters, who was AFAB and lived as a man in the 19th century until about 1909. Mari questions how Lillian's story affects the trans community as a whole. In a time of significant cultural and political upheaval in the 19th century, a lot of stuff was going on. There's the suffragette movement, early movements in the modern psychology movement, rapid industrialization. This is another story of, like, a woman living as a man at a time where women were not allowed as many rights, and it kind of is like, you know, it doesn't really matter if you wanted to be a man for the political and social benefits, or if you wanted to be a man for the financial benefits, or if you wanted to be a man because that's who you are. Either way, their stories still deserve to be told. Mari mentions that Lillian living as a man in the 19th century was groundbreaking at a time where transgender people and transgender issues were not in the forefront of political and cultural movement like we are today. Lillian used a male name, had a men's haircut, and wore men's clothing. But there is no mention of what male name that Lillian went by. So I will try to find that and give that additional context. Mari shares that Lillian's bold defiance of the gender roles of the time, not for performance or convenience of survival, but was rather a profound expression of her own gender identity. Life serves as an example of... Lillian serves as an early example of a person affirming their gender identity despite society's rigid expectations. Lillian's life living as a man underscores the fortitude of the transgender community and provides invaluable experience into transgender lives and experiences in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mari mentions that Lillian's story reminds us of the long struggle for transgender rights, the courage it takes to live authentically, and the profound impact that any one person can have on history. I feel like a lot of the times we don't realize how much of an impact we can have on ourselves and our community and everyone around us, and I like that Mari mentions how one person can make a difference and change things for the community for the better. Mari has a call to action to stand with the transgender community and to preside in sight of fear. He asks the listener to question what their role is in fostering a more understanding and accepting society. And I think that's something that I also want to sit with and think on, and I want everyone who's watching to think on as well. Another episode focuses on the unheard voices in 20th century transgender medicine. This episode focuses on a time period between 1899 and 1920 and questions how doctors treated queer and especially trans patients. This era brought about remarkable medical advancements that helped shape modern medicine, including stuff like germ theory and x-rays. However, Mari explains that this era's medical advancements were not always beneficial for all, and the LGBT community in particular the LGBT community experienced a particular reality that during this time that was marked by misunderstanding and mistreatment. I feel like there's definitely a power imbalance between cis doctors and trans patients, and that's something that Mari mentions as well, and that's something I talk about a lot in my episodes that focus on my transition, specifically my episode on my experience getting gender confirmation surgery. I got top surgery in 2020, and I got on testosterone in 2019. And those were both very, very different experiences. And I talk about the vast difference between having a supportive doctor and an unsupportive doctor and the power imbalances that can exist. So I highly recommend checking out that video if that sounds interesting to you. And I'll link that in the doobly-doo as well. At the time, there's a lot of pathology of homosexual and transsexual people, that there is something medically wrong to fix rather than a natural variation of the human condition, which we now understand queerness to be. However, the DSM still lists gender dysphoria as a mental illness, which is something I talk about more in my top surgery video. Most of the time, you're required to have this diagnosis for any type of gender reassignment surgery / gender affirming surgery or hormone replacement therapy. Mari shares his experience with getting a gender dysphoria diagnosis to get insurance to pay for his medical gender transition. It's also important to mention that it can be hard to get things like hormones or surgery if it's considered cosmetic rather than medically necessary. Right now, River's having some trouble getting access to their testosterone because they weren't diagnosed with gender dysphoria earlier. They didn't get diagnosed till they were in college. However, I'm able to access it much easier because I got diagnosed when I was in high school. However, I had to pay for my entire top surgery out of pocket because it was considered not medically necessary, because I could still be perfectly fine, live a perfectly healthy life with like boobs, but I wouldn't feel like myself. I wouldn't feel like a man. I wouldn't like, I don't like that part about me. I didn't like that part of me. I'm happy with my results, and I consider it life-saving care, but some cis medical professionals don't, and that's not fair. And I'm not even gonna get into the fucking weight limits for surgery. What the fuck? Anyway, the DSM lists gender dysphoria as a mental illness, and most of the time you're required to have this diagnosis for any type of gender reassignment surgery, / gender affirming surgery, or hormone replacement therapy. I still needed a diagnosis to get top surgery, and insurance didn't cover it. It was fucking bullshit. When I was 17, I got my top surgery. My top surgeon and anesthesiologist both sat me down and made me explain the procedure I was consenting to them. It might be different if you're not an adolescent, but I was 17 and 3/4, so do with that what you will. One common example is tattooing, mastectomy, and augmentation for the breast cancer survivor community. These are all things that could be considered cosmetic, but are actually super helpful and can be life-saving, gender-affirming care for some people. Another example I will give is my dad. He got a nose job because he has muscular dystrophy and fell and got injured, and he was wearing his glasses and they pushed into his nose and broke this part right here, so the cartilage got all messed up and it like messed up part of his like face, so he had to get a nose job to restore it to the best of his abilities, or to the best of the surgeon's abilities, and like they were trying to make him pay for it because it was not medically necessary, but you need a nose like to smell shit. It's like a safety thing, and also like that's a very obvious deformity that caused a lot of insecurity for him. That might be not considered medically necessary and he could still live without it, but it caused him a lot of euphoria to have that nose job to look like more like he did before his accident. So that's an example I wanted to give. And I will say, this also brought into the theme of why do only wealthy people get to feel comfortable in their bodies, and this includes myself. I am privileged to have top surgery, and I feel like everyone who wants to get these things should have access to them. Why are they so fucking expensive? Like, why do only the wealthy get to feel comfortable in their bodies? That's not fair. Mari also talks about having to see a psychiatrist to get his top surgery, and emphasizes how LGBTQ plus people deserve to have their identities recognized as something natural and not be pathologized. He also recommends the Pediatric Gender Identity book, so I am looking forward to reading that. I will also say there's no such thing as too late to transition. Everyone's still learning their gender identity every single day, and gender identity can fluctuate and change over time. Mari describes LGBTQ identities as natural variations of the human experience. Magnus Hirschfeld defines transvestism as sorry, my notes are confusing. I have no fucking clue what I was trying to describe on Magnus Hirschfield here. And I wanted to insert a clip about SNL. I don't know. Mari stresses the importance of recognition and acceptance of patients' gender identities and treating patients with equity. He questions how societal biases affect the medical community, as well as the well-intentioned work of cisgender allies and the role that they play in the medical misunderstanding of the queer and trans communities. There's an episode focusing on Gene Pearson, whose life, legacy, and overall impact on the transgender community began in the early 20s. He believed that inequality for all, regardless of gender identity. Mari describes Pearson's speeches, interviews, and writings as a beacon of hope for those in the trans community who felt alienated and misunderstood. Their words echoed feelings of many and provided hope and solidarity in a world that seemed against them. Mari describes Pearson's life as an example of the strength that comes from accepting and embracing one's identity. And Pearson's work emphasized the importance of education, navigating ignorance, and how ignorance relates to bias and equality. Pearson strove to foster understanding of diverse identities as well as challenge existing stereotypes to build a more accepting society. And their work serves as an example of how advisory can be a powerful catalyst for change by using the discrimination that they faced as a motivation for advocacy. They channeled their pain and exclusion into a force for good to bring societal change and positive action, which is something I try to do here on Queer History Matters as well. Mari considers himself privileged to have his family and friends by his side. His transition was smooth, and it was easy for him to medically transition due to the job he worked with good health insurance. Mari emphasizes that any one person can have a significant impact on history, and that's why it's so important to tell queer stories and uplift queer voices, especially trans people, and those who have faced hardship due to their marginalized identity or identities. This is Gene Pearson's story serves as just one example of this. Mari explains that great strides have been made, but there's still a very, very long way to go. However, it is still important to celebrate the small victories on a path to a more accepting and tolerant society. The last episode of Season 2 focuses on the Student Homicidal League. It was founded in 1967 and was one of the first student-run college clubs in the U.S. at the time, in a time where homosexuality was still considered a mental illness. They laid the groundwork for modern progress that we see today, and is part of striving towards a more accepting and equal society. They played a large part in the early LGBT rights movement in the American 1960s. They provided a safe space for transgender students at a time where transgender rights were borderline non-existent, increased the visibility and recognition of the transgender community, and stood against discrimination towards transgender individuals. They were a beacon of acceptance and advocacy at a time where discrimination against the trans community was at an all-time high, and their influence continues to resonate with LGBT plus individuals, especially on college campuses. Today, college students can look to the Student Homicidal League and see themselves in this long legacy of community. Mari describes it as a breath of fresh air going to his own LGBT student-run groups at a college campus. He shares his experience at Kennesaw State University. When he felt alone as a transfer student, he went to LGBT Center to find community, to find resources, and feel safe on campus. All the employees there had loads of resources, support groups, and community events. Like I said, Mari described it as a breath of fresh air. When Mari was in high school, they had an after-school program for queer students, but unfortunately Mari was not out yet, so he did not get a chance to go, but wish that he would have. If he was able to go back, he would. I want to go more into this in another video, but I talked about it a little bit more in an episode of Trans Kids I did with my friend Joan, and I will also link that in the description as well. That talks a little bit about my experience in high school and how that was as a queer person, because we went to middle school and high school together, so we do have a little bit of experience being in different environments as trans people, and I really highly recommend checking that out if you are interested in this specific episode of the Trans Lesson Plan. Mari calls attention to the Homophile League's role in the LGBT rights movement and shifting public opinion towards a more accepting stance at a time where homosexuality is still considered a mental illness. Today, we are lucky that only trans people are considered mentally ill for just existing, but hopefully one day the gender dysphoria diagnosis will no longer exist and we can just all be ourselves, and that transitioning will be free for everyone because healthcare is a human right. And that's the end of my notes for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I've been Trick, and this is Queer History Matters, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bless me. Happy 2026.